Hi, my name's Barbara Nanning. I worked on the 1977 Tons of Fun float, the Grin and Bear It, then the Cub of War, and after that I went abroad for a year and returned and worked on the Snowpoke, Snowpoke
Snowpoke.
float.
And I'm Steve Nanning. I worked, my first float was 1979 Cub of War. Then I was the transportation chairman in 1980 and 1981 on Hard Rock and Snowpoke. And my last float was Way Out Welcome.
Right. Now we'll go through each float you guys just talked about and share some stories, some lesser known facts, things like that about these floats. Let's start with 1977 Tons of Fun.
I had not intended to actually join Rose Float. My sister had been doing it for a few years, and I wanted to forge my own path. However, I came in and needed one more class, and at that time, Rose Float was offered as a class in agriculture. So I went ahead and took it, and found it a lot of fun, and I stayed around for my full time in college. Was an interesting year, getting to know a lot of new people. Got nicknamed the Donuts along with Ann Fitzgerald and Beth Mulcahy. It was said that we didn't have anything in our middles, so we were called Donuts. The float itself was supposed to roller skate on these landing gear that were from a jet.
It was a pair of F5
Yes.
landing gear that they'd gotten from Northrop.
However, there was issues with the joints, and one evening when they tried to test it, the float itself lurched forward and the wheels went underneath, and it was a dangerous situation. The next day, the committee met. I wasn't part of the meeting because I was still just a freshman, and the decision was made to lock the wheels. That particular meeting was very contentious. Could hear some yelling and screaming at the time, but I think the right decision was made for safety's sake. Then the second float, Grin and Bear It.
Wait, actually, I have a question about that.
Okay.
That was the first year of the water, right?
Oh, yes, I forgot
So
about
you
that.
tell about the water story.
That year, the three of us, the Donuts, challenged Kenny Powers to squirt us with a water fire extinguisher.
Was Kenny Powers an operator on the float?
He was. I don't remember what he was doing, but he was in the back part of the elephant.
The actual elephant or the little elephant in the wagon behind him?
The actual elephant, the larger. And so we dared him to squirt the water out during the parade towards us while we were sitting along the parade route. And he was really afraid he'd get into trouble, but we pushed him hard enough that he decided to go ahead and do it. And Bob Eubanks on air noticed it happening. And just at first he thought it was flowers that were being thrown out of the elephant, and then realized it was water, thought it was hilariously funny. And then every year since then looked for it.
So that's where that started.
Yeah, that tradition started.
Okay, that's a really cool part of our history right there. Because we did that for at least 20 more years after that, maybe 30.
Yeah, a long time.
Yeah.
And Bob Eubanks would look for it every year. He'd wait for it.
And to think it all started with the dare.
Who knew?
All right, I have another question. Were there any nicknames for the creatures, such as the elephants, that year? That you can remember?
I know there were, and I really don't remember them. Yeah, I can't recall.
Okay, let's move on to the next float, Grin and Barrett.
I was secretary of the committee that year, along with that was John McCurdy was chairman that year. The biggest story I remember from that particular float was the fact that the large wheels that were used did not work the way we had hoped, and they were going to put the rubber around the wheel itself, and the rubber fell out of the middle of the wheel, and it left the large channel, and it drove screws into Colorado Boulevard as we were driving down.
And those grooves stayed there for like, what, 20 years or something?
Years, yeah.
Before they finally repaved it?
Yeah.
Oh, we got your two cats fighting over here.
Yes.
Or playing. Okay, so that's all you have to talk about on Grin and Barrett?
Yeah, it
There's
was
not a lot of stories out of that one.
No,
Okay.
not really.
Now let's move on to 1979, Cubba War.
Cubba War that
The
year.
first year of computer animation, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was my first float.
I was secretary again, but this time of the club.
And I was an engineering student, living in the dorms, and I had a friend of mine told me he was working on the Rose float, and so I came down one Saturday afternoon to the lab looking for him, and nobody had ever really heard of him before. But then they looked at me and they said, "Do you want to learn how to weld or use a cutting torch?" And I said, "Sure." And I spent the rest of the day welding and cutting and having a great time. And I just kept coming back and back and back, having a lot of fun. So that was my first year.
It's also the year we met.
Yeah, that was the year we met. She didn't know I was alive. I had a crush on her, but she didn't know I existed. Let's see.
And you guys met through the program, right?
Yes,
We did.
And you guys became a Rose Float marriage as a result.
Yes, we did.
That year the float broke down on TV Corner, right?
Coming around the corner, we had a brand new governor on the engine, and the engine was up in the front pod of the float. Cubba War had two big pod areas, and then connected by the snake that was the gorilla was pulling back and forth on while the cubs played around on the front. But the engine was up in the front pod, and coming around the corner, something went wrong with the governor, and it stalled. And so Ray McDonough jumped out of the float, ran up, pulled off the cover, which was on the off-camera side, reached in and held the throttle essentially open with his hands. So we started it back up, and we're able to drive the float on around the TV corner and down the street. So the whole time that the float is going around the corner and down the street, on the off-camera side, Ray was on the outside laying against the pod with his hand in through the door, holding the throttle open. And then they got down, when we got past the cameras, then it stopped and went under tow.
And as a result of them like being there for, what was it, 4 minutes or a long time, right?
It seemed like a long time. It was actually happened pretty quick. I think they were only there for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
Okay.
They were just starting to pull tow trucks out and threaten, to put us under tow on camera. And then Ray, did his little heroics and got him going.
And to this day, we have not actually been towed past TV Corner.
That's right.
As of 2019. Good
That's
for
right.
us.
Yes.
But as a result of that situation there, because you guys were like drugged through the mud in your coveralls before that, right?
Oh, yeah.
So because Ray, was it Ray McDonough?
Ray McDonough.
Ray McDonough jumped out in his mud-stained coveralls. We got parade whites from that point on, right?
No, the whites actually were first thing on Ray. Ray's were unusual in that his coveralls were like a grayish blue color, as I recall. But the tradition sort of was when you got down and you decided to join in the Rose Float, they said, okay, go over to Sears and buy yourself a pair of white coveralls. And then, the inevitable day would have to come that you would wear your coveralls down to the lab for the first time. And then everybody else would just, see these pristine white coveralls and want to do something about it. So you'd start getting pulled through mud puddles and like painted on or stuff. That was as close to hazing, I think, as Rose Float ever got. But you would break in the new coveralls for anybody that wore them down to the lab for the first time.
Yeah.
We can pull out what our cover.
Yeah.
We still have our coveralls. I can go get those, and we can put them on camera to show what they look like after a number of years. So these are Barbara's coveralls after many years, and then here's the other tradition we always had was taking the float patches, and you would stack them up going down to show how many floats you had worked on. It was kind of a badge of seniority, if you will.
Yeah.
And then these were mine. I pulled my patches off for another reason later on, but I got painted Village Idiot at one point, and if you look at this closely, not only is there a lot of paint and hydraulic fluid stains, but there's a whole lot of welding burns all through this.
Yeah.
So that's what they would look like.
Yeah. And we have a correction on the understanding of parade whites now, right?
Yeah. The white coveralls have been a tradition for a long time, but after Cub War, I think that's when the idea started that the float crew would put on a brand new, clean set of coveralls for the parade.
And those were nicknamed parade whites. So, yes.
We hadn't heard that term.
I hadn't heard that term.
That's just what we call them nowadays, I guess.
Yeah.
Because, they're whites for parade day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so any more stories on Cub War? Any nicknames of those creatures? Anything like that?
I don't recall we weren't really into naming them at that time.
Yeah, I don't think so. Or if they did, we weren't the ones doing it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to 1980 Hard Rock.
Okay, well, as Barbara said before, she was in Peru, so this was I was the chairman of transportation for Hard Rock that year, and this was a rather interesting year because since Hard Rock was going to be a solid frame, and we hadn't really had a solid frame for a number of years. You didn't have a solid frame for Cub War or for Grin and Bear It or for Tons of Fun. We had to go and build a brand new frame, and that was the year that we were putting up the cover over the building pad at the lab. So that summer, Ward and I were splitting a lot of time, and then I think Todd Dice and Rick George were also over there quite a bit too. But we were splitting time between trying to get the cover up over at the lab, and we were laying out, cutting, and building the new frame over at Ag Engineering. So that got put together over there.
And that cover you got was a kit, but you guys had to assemble it yourself.
Yeah.
Yes, we did.
Yes, we did. We ended up putting together the frames. We would assemble those on the ground. And the first time we tried to lift one into position, we discovered that the forklift that would lift, the highest lifting forklift that we could get our hands on, didn't come anywhere close to being tall enough to get this frame all the way upright and then moved into its spot on the pad. So we ended up stacking about 10 to 12 pallets on the forks of the forklift, and then balancing the top of one of those frames on that and lifting the whole thing up. So it was a little on the sketchy side, shall we say, but we got those, we slowly moved them into position, settled them onto their bolts that had been placed into the new concrete slab, and then we got them bolted into place, and that's how that that cover went up. And
Okay,
then
so that's
we
how you
put
did the frames, but what about the roof panels?
Yeah,
the roof panels.
Yeah, we managed to put the roof panels on there,
Mhm.
and then we climbed on top of them and drilled them down. Um, Although I was terrified of heights, for some reason I was up there drilling with everybody.
Mhm.
It was a lot of fun.
So you said you were going to Peru, so that was just part of the year?
I was a full year, so this was during the summer we built the enclosure, so I was there.
Yeah, this was right before
Oh.
she left.
And
So you
then,
left in like September and came back June or something?
it was more like July to July.
Okay.
Mhm.
But you were there for the assembly of the
Yes,
the new
the
roof.
cover.
Yeah, this was all happening in like the May, June, early July time frame. And then let's see now.
I heard an interesting story about a modification to the dinosaur you did. Any
Well, there
stories
we,
on that?
we were having a discussion one night, and I saw Todd's video, and he kind of alluded to this story a little bit, but I want to clarify a few things. We'd been having a discussion about what gender the dinosaur was, and I said, well, I took it upon myself to clarify that. And so I welded up a pair of bits for the dinosaur, two really silvery spheres of nice, really super clean pencil rod. I mean, they were gorgeous. And then we hung them in the proper location. There was no other parts to this. It was just these two spheres hanging off the back of the dinosaur. And we were very proud of them until I think it was Sue Bergman took one look at him and insisted that they get removed. So somebody else gelded him. But yeah,
Was that the design chair or?
Susan was I think she was like club president or something that year. I think she was an officer in the club.
Yeah, would make sense.
Yeah. But she had those removed. Now let's see. There's a lot of good stuff on Hard Rock.
It had a crazy neck on it, right?
It did.
That was the first time.
One of the things,
floating rings?
this was a big innovation for Hard Rock. That was the first time that we ever used neoprene on a float, and Ward had designed this whole linked box structure for his neck that went out, and then we welded floating rings onto each of these boxes, and in between the boxes coming out on the sides were connections for rod end bearings that would go through the middle of each of these little box joints. The upshot was when the dinosaur's neck would move, it would be a very smooth motion that would come out this way. And we had two big rams right at the base of the neck. So his whole neck, which was about a good 15 feet long, something like that. We could raise the whole thing up and then turn it side to side. So he had a very, very large range of motion. And when we covered everything with this neoprene, it made it super smooth. You could not see any, you could barely see any hints of a supporting frame inside. It looked very, very natural. One of the problems that we had with that was it took us a long time to get the neoprene in, to the point that when it came time to move the float, we hadn't had that on there yet. So we moved the float to Pasadena, and on that drive, middle of the night, the float looked very strange because it was all white, and then you had this long neck frame with a head sticking out there. So in the middle of the night, it just looked like this ghostly head hanging out off the back of the float. The float crew on the way, they called for a pizza to get delivered to them. And again, I was focused on other things because this was my big job as transportation chairman, was getting everything, the whole kit and caboodle out to Pasadena. But the other construction guys had wanted to do a test drive. So we said, okay, look, once we get onto Colorado Boulevard, we'll unhook from the tow truck and drive it for a while because you wanted to get a test in. So we did that, and we had accumulated a lot of debris around the radiators, and one thing leading to another, it started to overheat. So somewhere out there, there's photos of this, but we pulled into a gas station in the middle of the night to get water back in the radiators, but you just have this ghostly white dinosaur in the gas station. Anyway, we got out to Rosemont, got settled in, and we finally got the neoprene, glued that on and around the neck, and then Ward and I ended up spending a lot of time inside the dinosaur's neck trying to adjust all of the rod end bearings, their lengths and stuff, so they wouldn't hinge and catch up as it was moving around. Took a lot of adjustment. I felt bad for Ward because he was the one that was having to do this stuff way up in the end of the neck because he's a lot, he's smaller than I am. I couldn't fit up there. And it was very claustrophobic and hot inside there trying to get that tuned. But we finally got it down, and it worked like a charm.
And you actually had that timed with other movements since it was
We
computer
did.
animation, right?
We did. Part of the animation on the float, the dinosaur's head at the very end would rock back and forth this way. He had a big old pair of Elton John type glasses on him.
So did you guys have like a motor that would swivel or a servo?
I think it was just like a basic windshield washer motion on the head. That was very simple, but we were using the hydraulics to actually drive and move where the head was around. But we had tied it into the computer programs that on the camera side of the float, there was one of the cavemen was drumming. He would sit there and drum on a turtle that he had flipped over. He'd be drumming on that. And then at one point, the dinosaur's head would swing around and be looking down at the caveman, and his head would rock back and forth like it's going to the music. And he would stop, and when the dinosaur got close to him, he would stop and he would lean back and look up at the dinosaur, and then go back forward and keep drumming again. And then the dinosaur's head would move off to go look at other things. So the head of the dinosaur was just sweeping all over the place all the time, but it was cued to go into different things, which was kind of fun. You had the cavemen up on the front of the float. One of them was sitting there banging a couple of rocks together, riding the dinosaur's tail.
It was like a bass playing a chicken, right?
There was a guy, he was standing on the front. We'd made him like a bass player. He was just like had his eyes sort of closed and wild hair. He looked like a total chill bass player, and he had some kind of a bird, and he was like stretching the neck out while he's playing it. So
just like the Flintstones.
Yep, just like the Flintstones. And then
what about some of the other animations like the eggs and stuff?
Well, I think Todd in his interview talked about his little rocking egg that he was working on, and then I had this little animation of an egg at the very back end of the float, which was a baby dinosaur would come out of the egg. He had to rise up out of his egg, and he had his hands over his ears, and he's turning side to side like this, like it's too much noise for him. And because he had to lift up out of this egg, I developed this set of nested cylinders or nested tubes that was operated by a hydraulic cylinder that would raise this up about a good, I think the throw on that was about 18 inches maybe to get him up out of his shell. And then I had a windshield wiper motor connected to a little rod coming out of his back that would make him do his side to side, his back and forth motion. 2 years later, we took this same nested tube thing, and they refined it, and that became what was called a Zork tube, which is what did the 2.5-3 foot throw that brought the Zorks up out of their volcanoes on Way Out Welcome.
Okay.
So that's where that came from.
Any more stories you'd like to share on 1980 Hard Rock?
I think I hit all of them. I don't think I have any more from that one. That was a fun float.
Sounds like it.
It was a fun float.
It was very well animated.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to 1981 Snowpoke.
Okay. Snowpoke was a lot of work. The parade itself, pretty uneventful. I think probably the best stories that I have off of Snowpoke was when was after the parade, and we'd brought the snail and his shell back to the lab. The caterpillar had gone back up to San Luis Obispo, and but it's a quiet night at the lab, and it was me, Todd, Ward, and Rick George were there, and I was really into rock climbing at that time, so I had been wanting to climb up the outside of the snail shell, so I kicked and clawed and made my own footholds through the chicken wire and stuff, and got to the top of that and got that out of my system. And then I came back down, and Todd had grabbed, we would make cannons all the time down there. You just take a tube, weld a plate onto the end of it, maybe a couple of pieces of pencil rod as a tripod for it, use a cutting torch to make a hole in the bottom, and then you sort of whack out the flame on your foot and fill up the whole chamber. You put some wadding and drop a couple lemons or whatever into the top, fill up the chamber with the gas, and then relight the torch and touch it off, and boom. So Todd's got the cannon out there, and I looked and I said, yeah, let's take a couple of, we'll load it with a couple of lemons. We're going to fire it right through the snail. So we load it up, and we point it, point blank right at the snail. And I touched off the cannon. We hear the boom, and we looked, and there was no evidence that anything had happened. There was no sign of anything on the snail shell. And Todd and I are looking at each other going, what the heck? We couldn't have missed. And we go and look a little closer, and there was a hole maybe about this big through the flowers and the cocooning, and you could just see behind it was an intact chicken wire. And we stepped inside the snail shell, and the whole inside was lemon fresh. There was lemon pulp everywhere, all over all of the electronics that the electronics people hadn't pulled out of the float yet.
They must have loved you for that one.
Yeah, they were not real pleased with us. No harm was actually done, but Dale Wong had some choice words. He and Peter Hattinger were not real happy. But then we came around, after Todd and I came out of the inside of the float, we came around to the front, and here was, I looked up and I saw Ward and Rick up on the head of the snail, and they were bouncing up and down. The whole thing was bouncing around like this. And I thought, that looks like fun. I want to be next. And the two of them were bouncing around, and then all of a sudden we heard this big bang. And Rick looked at me, and Ward's eyes got about this big, and they were just starting to move to get off when we heard another huge bang. And this was both of the big rod end bearings letting go that held the snail's head upright in position. And the whole snail head crashed boom, straight down into the slab with Ward and Rick riding it all the way down. And if you know where to look on the slab right now, you can see these two little dings out of the concrete in the slab. And that was a snail's head crashing down onto it that night.
Yeah. That was also the year that we actually started dating.
Yes.
We started before the semester. Once I got back from Peru.
Mm-hmm.
And people knew that Steve was dating someone. They just didn't know who he was dating. We kept it a secret for about 5-6 weeks, I think.
Yeah.
And we got engaged right after the parade.
Yeah, I got engaged in January.
Yeah.
January of 81.
Yep.
Very cool.
And then, yeah, I think the last float was Way Out Welcome.
1982. Yep.
But we were both graduated by that time. So I was doing some preliminary work, up until June, July time frame on that, and then came down and helped decorate. But that was when we were starting to phase out.
But they did use your Zork tube on that float.
Well, it wasn't my Zork tube. I mean, like I said, I'd come up with the idea of the nested cylinders, but I want to clarify. It was my original cut at it was a rough design. They really, I think it was like maybe Peter Mowry was one of the people that was working on it. They took that and they really refined it into a much better. Mine was the phase one kind of thing. They really took it to the extreme with the Zork tube. But the Zork and the effect of the Zorks popping up out of the volcanoes was just dynamite. Especially when we decorated their heads to look like volcano explosions and then they come out.
That's one thing I love about this program is we can basically build on previous floats and take an idea and evolve it to something even better.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I know advice for
advice for future.
Yeah. Well,
let me go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead. I've been talking for a while.
Let me phrase the question.
Okay.
All right. What advice would you give to current and future rose floaters?
Well, for me personally, I would say just go ahead and do it. Don't think you can't do it just because you're not an engineer. I was an anthropology major, and I learned how to weld. I learned how to use a cutting torch. I learned how to drive a tractor, grow flowers. It was a lot of fun, and I met a lot of people, met my husband. So just do it.
And I'll just, I'm part of some academic boards at Cal Poly. I'm now actually teaching a course out there, and I'm very excited about that. But one thing I'll tell the students, or anytime I have a get together with them, especially the engineering students, is probably the best thing I ever got out of Rose Float was the experience of working on a program or a project with a schedule that was absolutely not going to slip. And so if there was a problem, you found a way to get around it. And it gives you a mindset to carry forward in your career. You just don't, after that, I hate missing any kind of a deadline. And I've got a reputation for keeping them. But that comes from Rose Float. You find a way because the float rolls at 8 a.m.
Thank you, Barbara and Steve Nanning, for taking the time to share your stories with these future generations of rose floaters.
Good luck. Keep rolling.